And our next speaker is Pablo Fernandez. And Dr. Pablo Fernandez has a background in the clinical and pharmaceutical research, and he has been active in this field for many years and a lot of practical experience. And currently, Pablo Fernandez is a member of the UKRIO Advisory Board, and he has also recently been elected as one of ENRIO's first vice presidents. And UKRIO is the UK Research Integrity Office that was founded in 2006. And ENRIO, or UKRIO, has actually been one of the founding members of ENRIO in 2008, if not the founding member. And Pablo will now talk about the impact of the pandemic on the work of research integrity practitioners in UK.
Thank you very much, Jordis. Thank you. To everybody. I first need to send a slight apology for my informal appearance. With COVID going on, one of the main issues that one has is that travel cannot be easily planned, and plans made are often changed at the last minute. So I'm speaking to you not from my study, as you can see in the background, that's artificial, but from Seville in the south of Spain, where the temperatures in the shade are now 38 degrees, and therefore the idea of a shirt and tie was not as attractive as it might be elsewhere. So please forgive my appearance, and let me talk briefly about this topic that has been assigned to me. This is, as it were, the elephant in the room. Everybody has horror stories of how the pandemic is affecting the work of research integrity, the work of research in general. But we thought we would have a stab at putting together in our meetings. Everybody has been saying, you know, these things are made worse by the pandemic. There are some advantages. So what I did is I went back to our office in London and asked our colleagues from the point of view, of course, of UKRIO, in order to share with all of you how has this been played out. So we have a story to tell, like I'm sure most of you have as well, because, of course, the pandemic has had a very deep and very wide impact. So my next slide, if I manage to do it, there we go. This, as I say, I'm going to put the example of our association, but I know from speaking to other colleagues that most people have had very similar initiatives and experience. What we decided to do at the beginning of the pandemic, when everything had to go online, was to start hosting small virtual roundtable events, like little workshops for 12 to 15 attendees, just to let the research integrity leads of the various institutions that are member of UKRIO, so universities, research institutes, and so on, let them speak, have an open and frank discussion without a particular agenda on the concerns that they had, and they were able to share freely in that environment, and then any positive changes that arise from the changes in practice that were imposed by the pandemic. So, for instance, the remote working. In this question, we realized that one of the main movers for change was that rapid transition to online remote working. And that had, in fact, brought some positive changes. It wasn't all negative, it wasn't all horror stories, although, as I say, we all have them, but it was the whole thing had brought in, for instance, curiously, improvements in ethics review, a faster and more streamlined submissions of applications. As people had to immediately go online, they had to find ways of doing these applications in a more streamlined way. And of course, the reviewers also were offline. So they weren't taking as long, and the communications were clearer because everybody knew that you only get one chance to write a paragraph. And if that paragraph does not communicate properly, then you can have a lot of misunderstanding. So there was an emphasis on these things. So that curiously improved in some way the ethics review, not just the timings but the quality as well. There was also a desire from most researchers to attend research integrity training. The stories in the press have been so difficult for many researchers and have had such impact on the reputation of science in some cases in the public that all researchers and institutions seem to be more inclined now to make sure that research is carried out in the best possible way. There was also, of course, less time traveling to meetings. That is, unless you were caught in a foreign country without being able to go home, as I am now. But you didn't have to get in the car, to get in the train, go somewhere, or to fly somewhere. There was therefore a better work-life balance for a lot of people in that they were able to work in a way that suited their home situation a little better. And in general, the transition to online remote working has opened up conversations on research culture. People have had the time to reflect on why we do things the way we do them, why we don't do certain things, and why not, why don't we try different things? So that's been a very positive way. Of course, remote working has very clear pitfalls, and I'm sure that you will add to this list because everybody has found that there are issues or problems with supervision of researchers. How does one do that effectively and properly over email, over Zoom, over the online, without having that direct contact in the lab or in the clinic or whatever? The impact of childcare responsibilities during lockdown. I am now too old to have my own children to care for. They are now in their 40s, so the only thing that happens is that they cost me more money now. But they do have to look after their children, and that has increased the stress of trying to hold down a professional job and the home situation, the homeschooling, etc. Another curious problem is the issue of moving data collection remotely. How does one get consent in a video call rather than a face-to-face interview? Is that as valid a means, a mechanism, for instance, of obtaining informed consent? Other issues as well, but that was one that came up in our seminars a lot. There was the burden of amending project plans and ethical reviews to fit in with these new ways of working. And of course, the well-known and well-documented impact on PhD programs. Laboratories shut, so all your experiments in many cases were wasted or had to be repeated or had to be replanned in different ways. The supervision problems that we alluded to at the beginning. So there was also some pitfalls in this area. Others, reflecting more on the research integrity officers, was, for instance, having to run misconduct investigations remotely instead of face-to-face. It is much, it's very different. In some cases worse, in some cases easier, but it was a more convoluted process in that sense. We all have spent too much time on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or FaceTime or whatever it is that we've been using, Google Meet. And that has developed what is now known as the Zoom fatigue syndrome. And I think we've all suffered from that. On the one hand, Zoom has been amazing, and these offline things, in being able to continue things. And as we have learned to use these platforms better, they have allowed us to do things like we're doing today, meet with colleagues to talk about these issues without necessarily having to travel there. It has also led to unrealistic expectation of timescales. As you are at home all the time, well, why don't you get on and do this later, even later in the evenings or in the weekends and things like that. And then, of course, from research integrity point of view, the well-known fact that by adding the magical word COVID to a grant, you may get a little more money or more exposure or get your grant approved more, when in fact the grant wasn't about COVID at all, and quite a number of those have been picked up in the system. So these were some of the pitfalls that came out in our seminar. In terms of the impact on the research culture, there is a bit of everything, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. There are things that, in some sense, the pandemic has highlighted the systemic issues that research has, that we have all been talking about for a long time, but then nothing's happened. But the pandemic has kind of made it worse, has crystallized it in us. And the pitfalls of peer review were often mentioned in our workshop. The importance of a team environment rather than one famous principal investigator having the name on every paper and everything, and everybody else working for them. Issues of bullying and harassment, and of course the public engagement and understanding of research. With most of you, I'm sure, have struggled with having to explain to the public issues of research, the uncertainties inherent, for instance, in my own field of biomedical, the inherent uncertainties and that we are dealing in many cases with the probabilities rather than certainties and so on. And this has led the public in general to scrutinize science rather more than they had before. Now, every paper is discussed apparently in the morning newspaper rather than having a more sober discussion in the scientific environment and then finally being picked up. And the questions of preprints, as soon as something hits the preprints, it's got wide dissemination. So the public gets the impression, and it becomes in many cases cynical about the importance of science, of good research, well reported. And of course is the issue of waste in research. It has been highlighted by that very process of review of grants, of protocols, of research proposals, how much it's important that we are conscious of the money that is being spent in research that is either repeated or irrelevant. On a positive note, this was a sentence, the takeaway message that our senior project officers in the office wrote to me as a result of all these seminars that we were running. From these events, we found that there's been some excellent progress in areas of research integrity culture at all our subscribing institutions, and it has aided some institutions to come up with new policies and ideas and share them with others. So that's a good note, I think. And I think also, before I finish this talk, I will refer you to our resources. I've been talking about these webinars that we've had during the last year or so, and you can find them at that link in our or simply by going to our website UKRIO.org and find those, and also the presentations at our very recent annual conference in 2021 also available for use. And finally, we produced a new checklist. I know you love the checklist, we all do, because they orientate us. So we published one in October 2020, and you have again the reference here. And now it just rests to me to say thank you all for your attention. Jordis?
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. Thank you also for these great insights. I'm sure that many of us can relate to this list that you presented, actually. Oh, yeah, now you're back. Your screen was a bit frozen. Anything else I wanted to say? Yeah, no. Actually, I just found it interesting that you said that there's time to reflect, because we just made the experience that over pandemic there are way more inquiries suddenly. So yeah, I see that there is one question. So Annie, maybe you could forward this question to Pablo.
Sure thing. So here's the question to Pablo. Can you please say a little bit more about the impact on PhD program level?
Well, no, I can't. Sorry, is the short answer. It has been very wide, so it's difficult to pin it down. But there has been a documented impact, and you can read over the last X months articles in Nature, for instance, that have mentioned the various problems. I mean, I haven't gone into detail of the issues of how research is managed, of course, and the problems, as I alluded, that the pandemic has simply brought these things to the surface, but we've all lived with them, bullying in the workplace, and apart from that, of course, the logistical issues, the delays that have been caused in experimental part of the PhD work, in the submission, in the review, the impact of people actually going sick with COVID, not just PhD students, but also supervisors and so on. So the whole thing is being quite complex, but I couldn't give you an example, immediate example. But as I say, it's been well documented. You just have to leaf through the pages of a journal like Nature, and you will see plenty of that.
Okay, thank you, Pablo. I can also just echo on the recommendation of the materials that are on UKRIO's website, because you have a great collection, and also UKRIO has published a statement on COVID-19 too, I think. So you should check that out. And with that, we can actually conclude the first session. We have a short break, but I also briefly wanted to mention that the second part of today's webinar will be hosted by Helga Nolte, and just a few words on Helga. Helga is currently working in the Office of Research Integrity at the University of Hamburg, which joined ENRIO in 2013, but Helga actually is a member of ENRIO since 2010 already, so active in the network for over a decade. And she joined because she was leading the German Research Ombudsman Office here at the time. And yeah, so we will meet back in 5 minutes. I think that should be fine for a break, and we will see how many we are in 5 minutes. Otherwise, maybe take a minute more. Yeah, thank you to all our speakers from the first session now, and yeah, see you again.